The title itself is not a mere arrangement of words, but a summons that reaches deeper than the noise of daily life. Like the sudden tolling of a bell in a silent countryside. God is trying to reach you. Don't skip this. Is not a casual suggestion, nor is it the sort of phrase one should pass by as one passes the headlines of a newspaper or the idle chatter of a passerby. It is, in fact, a claim that the eternal, the very author of existence, is at this moment seeking your attention. And if such a claim is true, then what could possibly be more urgent, more necessary, or more astonishing? We often imagine that God reveals himself only in grand spectacles, thunder rolling over mountains, seas splitting apart, or voices that shake the heavens. But what if his most insistent approach is not through the extraordinary, but the ordinary? What if the very breath you just took, unnoticed by you but sustained by him, is his reminder? What if the restlessness you feel at night, when the lights are off and the laughter fades, is his hand upon your heart, urging you to look beyond the veil of appearances? There is a terrible temptation in our age to think that distraction is harmless. We keep our minds busy, filled with chatter and images, so that we never confront the silence in which the divine voice speaks. To skip such a summons is not like skipping a line in a book or a song on a playlist. To skip this is to close the door on a visitor who has crossed eternity to knock at your door. And though he is infinitely patient, your time is not infinite. Every day that passes without listening is one more step toward forgetting that you were called at all. Consider how messages reach us. A friend may write, and we ignore it, thinking we will reply later. A knock may sound, and we delay, certain that the visitor will wait. Yet how many times has opportunity been lost because we assumed it would return? The divine summons is not less, but infinitely more urgent. For this is not merely about improving your life, adding a measure of peace, or avoiding some earthly loss. This is about the very core of your being. Whether you will live as one who belongs to the light, or drift further into shadows that you pretend are harmless, but that conceal a profound emptiness. God often speaks through the ordinary, not just the extraordinary. Distraction is the greatest danger to hearing his call. Skipping his summons is rejecting the purpose of your existence. Every moment, joy, sorrow, beauty, regret, is a message from him. When people think of God speaking, they imagine the heavens cracking open with thunder, the sky ablaze with light, or a voice echoing louder than the seas. They picture miracles so dramatic that no soul could possibly mistake them for chance. Yet the paradox is that more often than not, the voice of God comes not in a storm, but in a whisper, not in the earthquake, but in the stillness that follows. We are trained by our senses to expect spectacle, yet the Eternal delights in wrapping his greatest truths in the folds of the ordinary. That is his way, to invite, not to overwhelm, to woo, not to coerce. He has no need of fireworks when a simple sunrise can proclaim his majesty, nor of violent interruptions when the quiet pang of conscience can be the loudest sermon to a soul willing to hear. It is easy to overlook such subtlety, because we are restless creatures, always expecting that significance must roar. But what if the meaning of life is concealed in the ordinary moments we rush past? Consider the laughter of a child, the ache of hunger, the rhythm of the seasons, the ache in your chest when you watch a sunset slip beneath the horizon. Each of these is so common that we dismiss them as background noise, yet it is precisely through them that God often speaks. The child's laughter reveals innocence and joy untouched by cynicism, pointing to what humanity was meant to be. Hunger reveals dependence, reminding us that we are not self-sufficient, but sustained by something beyond ourselves. Seasons reveal order, the faithful turning of the world by hands unseen. The sunset reveals beauty and transience, stirring a longing for permanence in a heart that knows everything here fades too quickly. God could, if he wished, shout into every ear and burn his presence across every sky. But then faith would not be faith, and love would not be love. If there is no possibility of ignoring him, there is no freedom to choose him. By speaking in the ordinary, he gives us space to decide, to lean in closer and say, I recognize this voice. The subtlety is not weakness but mercy, for it allows us to approach him, not as slaves terrified by sheer force, but as children responding to the familiar voice of a father. The irony is that many who long for a sign already swim in an ocean of them. They ask for wonders, yet their very breath is a wonder. Their mind with its capacity to think and imagine is a wonder. Their heart that beats faithfully without their command is a wonder. If these were suddenly stripped away, the absence would scream louder than any miracle. But because they are constant, we call them normal, forgetting that normal is only the disguise of the miraculous. We crave a supernatural interruption, while standing blind to the fact that existence itself is supernatural from beginning to end. This truth can be felt most sharply in silence. When distractions are peeled away, when noise subsides, one can sometimes sense a presence that cannot be explained. It is not dramatic in the way lightning splits a tree, but it is unmistakable in the way it makes you aware that you are being watched, known, and addressed. The ordinary silence, then, becomes extraordinary because it is filled with someone. How many have fled from such moments by turning on another screen, filling their heads with noise again, just to drown out the uncomfortable weight of being pursued by the divine? And yet, that silence is often the very place where his voice is clearest. It is worth noting that some of the most profound truths of existence are communicated through the smallest and most fragile vessels. A single flower blooming in a crack of pavement speaks of resilience and beauty woven into the fabric of life. A stranger's unexpected kindness whispers of grace. The H of guilt after a selfish act speaks of justice etched into the human soul. These are not lightning bolts, yet each one is a messenger. God often speaks not by tearing open the skies, but by slipping meaning into the things we thought we understood. He is the author of the ordinary, and he uses the ordinary to point us beyond itself. There is also something deeply humbling in this method. If God only spoke through spectacles, it would flatter the proud who believe they are worthy of being addressed in grand ways. But when he speaks through the ordinary, it levels the ground. A farmer tilling his soil, a child sitting in a classroom, a mother folding laundry, a worker on a crowded street. Each stands before the same possibility of hearing the eternal call. None can boast that they needed visions or miracles, for the same sun rises on all, the same rain falls, the same stars declare their maker to every watching eye. The voice in the ordinary is democratic in the truest sense, open to all who are willing to listen. To ignore this is to miss the point of life itself. If you wait for the heavens to split before you listen, you may spend your entire life waiting, while stepping over countless invitations at your feet. The ordinary is not meant to distract you from the sacred. It is the very canvas upon which the sacred is painted. God is not absent simply because you do not see fireworks. He is present precisely in the mundane things you call insignificant. What you dismiss as routine may in truth be revelation. The ordinary, then, is not to be skipped or despised, but entered into with new eyes. When you eat, you are reminded of dependence. When you rest, you are reminded of limitation. When you work, you are reminded of purpose. When you love, you are reminded of eternity pressing into time. Each of these moments, though plain on the surface, carries the weight of the divine. To hear God in them requires humility, a willingness to believe that greatness hides in simplicity, and that the eternal has chosen to wrap himself in the fabric of the common. Distraction is perhaps the most subtle, yet the most destructive danger to the soul. It does not announce itself as an enemy. It does not march into the mind with banners of rebellion or with threats of violence. Instead, it creeps in quietly, offering comfort, amusement, or mere business. It disguises itself as harmless and necessary, as though the endless stream of images, conversations, and tasks were nothing more than the normal rhythm of life. And yet distraction is precisely what dulls the heart to the voice of God. It is not a single act of defiance, but 1,000 small glances away from what matters most, until the truth becomes a faint echo barely remembered. The greatest danger of distraction is not that it convinces us to reject God openly, but that it persuades us to postpone listening. We tell ourselves there will be time later, when work slows down, when the children are grown, when we have retired, when the crisis passes. But later never comes because distraction has no end. It multiplies, fills every gap, and ensures there is always something new to occupy the mind. The momentary urgency of trivial things eclipses the eternal significance of divine things. The result is that the summons of God, though always present, is drowned out by 1,000 lesser voices. Think of how easily we surrender our attention. A device buzzes and we drop what we are doing. A headline flashes and we are pulled into its urgency. A task nags and we devote our strength to it as if the world depended on its completion. None of these things, in themselves, seem evil. Yet their cumulative effect is catastrophic. They fragment the soul, leaving no space for silence, no time for reflection, no openness for God. The one thing necessary is crowded out by countless things that are not. It is not rebellion but carelessness, not hatred but forgetfulness, that pulls us away. There is a peculiar irony in how modern life treats distraction. We do not only tolerate it, we celebrate it. To be busy is to be important. To be constantly available is to be needed. To fill one's schedule is to prove one's worth. In such a culture, silence looks like laziness, solitude looks like weakness, and stillness looks like wasted time. But silence, solitude, and stillness are the very conditions in which the voice of God is heard. Distraction, then, is not simply a matter of personal weakness, but a cultural force, shaping our habits until we forget what it means to listen. Consider how Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray. He was not merely resting. He was teaching us something about the human soul. If the Son of God needed moments away from the crowd to hear the Father clearly, how much more do we? Yet instead of withdrawing, we crowd our days with noise. We wake to alarms, scroll through feeds, fill commutes with chatter, and fall asleep to glowing screens. The voice of God is not absent, but we have built a wall of distraction so thick that it cannot penetrate. The tragedy is not that he does not speak, but that we refuse to make room to hear. Distraction also weakens conscience. The pang you feel after a cruel word, the weight that rests on you after a selfish act, the unease that comes when you walk away from what you know is right. These are moments when God calls through the voice of conscience. But if you immediately turn to distraction, the pang is dulled. You drown it with entertainment, silence it with noise, bury it with activity. Over time, conscience grows quieter not because God has stopped speaking, but because you have trained yourself not to listen. Distraction then becomes a shield against conviction, a way of avoiding the discomfort that might lead to repentance. There is another danger. Distraction promises relief but delivers emptiness. People turn to it for comfort, to escape the ache of loneliness or the weight of anxiety. But distraction cannot heal, it only numbs. Like a drug, it dulls the pain temporarily, leaving the wound beneath untouched. The ache for meaning, for truth, for God himself, is still there when the noise stops. The tragedy is that many never stop long enough to feel it fully. They keep the distractions flowing, thinking they are alive, when in truth they are drifting further from the source of life. The human heart was not made for fragments, but for focus. It was made to gaze upon God and find in him the unity of all desires. Distraction divides the gaze, scattering it among countless small things until the heart itself feels divided, restless, and unsatisfied. Augustine once described the restless heart as one that finds no peace until it rests in God. Distraction, then, is restlessness made permanent. It ensures the heart never lingers long enough to discover peace, always chasing after the next flicker of interest, always running from the silence where God waits. This is why distraction is more dangerous than doubt. Doubt wrestles with God, asks questions, and demands answers. Distraction does not wrestle at all, it simply turns away. The doubter may find faith on the other side of questioning, but the distracted person may never even realize there was a question to ask. Distraction lulls the soul to sleep, and the sleeping soul is far harder to awaken than the struggling one. Yet there is hope in recognizing the pattern. To see distraction for what it is, to name it as the enemy of listening, is already to weaken its hold. The simple act of stopping, of choosing silence, of sitting with unease instead of drowning it, creates a space where God can speak. It is not that He has been absent, but that we have been unavailable. The moment we turn, even in the smallest degree, we often discover that He was closer than we imagined, waiting patiently through all our noise. To skip the summons of God is not like skipping a page in a book, or turning away from a stranger's greeting in the street. It is to turn aside from the very purpose for which you exist. For if there is truth in the claim that the Maker of all things is reaching out to you, then the act of ignoring Him is not merely an oversight, but a refusal of the deepest reality. The weight of this is almost unbearable when one thinks clearly about it. We are not dealing here with an optional suggestion that may or may not improve one's life, as one might skip an exercise routine or a lecture. We are dealing with the call of the Eternal, the one who gave breath to your lungs and thought to your mind. To dismiss such a call is to dismiss the reason you draw breath at all. The world is full of pursuits that promise meaning. Careers, relationships, wealth, pleasure, recognition. Each presents itself as a worthy goal, urging you to commit your time and energy to it. And yet, every one of these ends the same way. Careers end with retirement or failure, wealth slips away at death, recognition fades into obscurity, and even the strongest human relationships are broken by the grave. None of these are evil in themselves, but none of them can carry the full weight of your purpose. To live for them, as if they were ultimate, is to build on sand. The tide will come, and what you built will be swept away. The summons of God is not another option among these, but the foundation beneath them all. To ignore it is to build your house without ground beneath it, and the collapse is not a question of if but when. There is something both terrifying and merciful about this. Terrifying, because it means that every choice you make has eternal weight. You cannot shrug and say, "It does not matter." To skip the call is to choose a path of emptiness that stretches into eternity. Merciful, because the call comes not once but again and again, woven into the fabric of daily life. Every pang of conscience, every glimpse of beauty, every longing for something more than the world can give is another invitation. God is not silent, nor is He indifferent. He calls in the morning and in the evening, in joy and in sorrow, through abundance and through loss. To skip it, then, is not to miss a single chance, but to repeatedly close the door on countless mercies that were placed before you. It is easy to disguise this skipping as mere postponement. Few people say outright, "I will never listen." They say instead, "I will listen later, when life is calmer, when questions are fewer, when I have the time." But later is the most effective disguise of refusal. Life never becomes calmer. Questions never disappear. Time never feels abundant. By the time one is ready, the heart has grown so accustomed to ignoring that it no longer hears. What was once an urgent summons becomes faint, then forgotten, until it is drowned out entirely by the noise of trivial things. The danger of skipping is not that you reject God violently, but that you do so passively, without even noticing that you have said no. The tragedy is sharpened by the fact that this summons is not burdensome but life-giving. When God calls, it is not to rob you but to restore you, not to limit but to free, not to diminish but to fulfill. Yet to the distracted mind, it feels like an interruption, an intrusion upon the small kingdom you are building for yourself. Skipping it seems harmless in the moment, like pressing later on an alarm. But the alarm does not ring forever. The time given to you is finite, and every choice to skip is a choice to use that time for something that cannot last. The cost is not apparent immediately, but one day it will be clear that what was skipped was not an optional message, but the very center of meaning itself. Think of how people react when they miss an opportunity of great value. Someone fails to invest in a venture that later prospers, and they say, "If only I had acted then." Someone misses the chance to reconcile with a loved one before death, and the regret is unbearable. These are heavy losses, yet they pale in comparison to skipping the summons of God. For here the loss is not wealth or reconciliation, but life itself, not in the sense of breathing and eating, but in the sense of what life was meant to be: communion with the one who made you. To miss that is to miss everything, even if you gain the whole world in return. There is also the question of responsibility. If you were never called, you might plead ignorance. But you have been called, and you know it. Every moment when you sense that the world cannot satisfy you, every moment when your conscience stirs, every moment when beauty takes your breath away, you are confronted with something beyond the ordinary. These are not accidents but messages, and to skip them is to skip a deliberate act of grace directed to you. You cannot claim you were overlooked. You can only admit you refused to see. That refusal, repeated day after day, becomes a life built on avoidance rather than truth. Some imagine that ignoring the call means neutrality, as if by skipping they have chosen nothing at all. But that is the greatest illusion of all. To skip is to choose. To ignore is to decide. The summons of God divides reality into two paths, one of response and one of refusal. There is no middle ground. The one who listens and the one who skips stand in different places, even if both claim to be undecided. By not listening, you have already decided against. Every moment of human experience is not random or meaningless, but part of a vast language through which God speaks. We are often taught to divide life into sacred and secular, imagining that God reveals himself only in extraordinary visions, religious rituals, or rare moments of transcendence, while everything else is mere background. Yet the truth is that joy, sorrow, beauty, and regret are not just feelings that come and go. They are deliberate messengers, each carrying a fragment of the divine summons. To recognize them as such is to realize that the whole of existence is charged with significance, that no moment is wasted, and that every experience has the potential to turn your gaze upward. Joy is perhaps the clearest of these messages, for it is the one we all desire and pursue. When laughter fills a room, when music lifts the heart, when love brings delight, we glimpse something beyond ourselves. Joy has a peculiar quality. It never feels complete in itself, but always points beyond. The moment of delight is fleeting, and yet it awakens in us a longing for permanence. The child's giggle, the triumph of a hard-earned success, the beauty of a summer morning, each one stirs happiness, but also a hunger for more, as though it were a signpost pointing to a greater joy, not bound by time. That longing is not a cruel trick of the universe, but a divine reminder that we were made for something more than passing pleasures. Joy whispers that eternity exists, that fulfillment is not an illusion but a promise. Sorrow, on the other hand, seems at first to speak only of loss. It comes in tears shed over broken relationships, failures, illness, or death. It presses down on the soul with a weight that feels unbearable. Yet sorrow, too, is a messenger. It reveals that the world is not as it was meant to be, that brokenness is real, that hearts ache because something precious has been fractured. In every grief, there is a protest this should not be. That protest itself is a clue, for if the world were only chaos, if all was random and meaningless, sorrow would have no place. We would not weep at all, because there would be nothing to weep for. The very existence of sorrow is evidence that goodness exists, that something worth protecting has been marred, and that a deeper restoration must be possible. God speaks through sorrow not by diminishing its pain, but by allowing it to stir in us a longing for healing, for justice, for a world where every tear will be wiped away. Beauty speaks with a different voice. A mountain peak bathed in sunrise, the intricacy of a single flower, the order of the stars in the night sky. All these arrest us with wonder. Beauty does not argue or persuade. It simply confronts us with something so radiant that it demands silence. Why should the world be beautiful at all? Evolution may explain function, but it cannot explain why the world should be wrapped in splendor, why colors, patterns, and harmony should touch the soul with awe. Beauty is gratuitous, unnecessary if survival were the only aim, and yet it is everywhere. It is as if the Creator painted his signature across the canvas of creation, reminding us that he is not only powerful but also good, not only wise but also generous. Every encounter with beauty is an invitation to lift the eyes beyond the object itself to the one who made it. Regret is perhaps the most haunting of all these messages. It arises in the quiet moments when conscience awakens, when we remember the harsh words spoken, the opportunity wasted, the selfish act done in secret. It lingers long after the event has passed, like a shadow that refuses to leave. Regret is painful, but its pain has purpose. It is not meant to crush but to awaken. It tells us that our choices matter, that good and evil are not illusions, that we are accountable for what we do. If there were no moral law, there would be no regret. We would simply act and move on, untroubled. But the fact that regret stings us is proof that God has inscribed his law upon the human heart. Regret is his way of calling us back, of urging us not to settle for a crooked path, but to turn toward what is true and right. These four, joy, sorrow, beauty, and regret, are not isolated voices but parts of a chorus. Together they sing the same song, that life is not random, that you are being addressed, that God is reaching out. Joy calls you forward with promises of fulfillment. Sorrow warns you of brokenness and awakens a hunger for restoration. Beauty reminds you of his generosity and majesty. Regret draws you back to the path of righteousness. None of these experiences are neutral. Each is freighted with meaning. Each is a word in the divine language spoken into the human soul. To ignore them is to misread the world. Many people treat joy as nothing more than a chemical reaction, sorrow as an unfortunate accident, beauty as an aesthetic quirk, and regret as psychological discomfort. But to reduce them in this way is to strip them of their true weight. It is like standing before a masterpiece and insisting it is only pigment on canvas, missing the message encoded in every stroke. God has woven his summons into the very fabric of your existence, so that no matter where you turn, his voice is there. To walk through life deaf to this is not to live fully, but to stumble past treasures as though they were pebbles. The remarkable thing is that these experiences are universal. You do not need wealth, education, or status to know them. The poor and the rich alike feel joy and sorrow. The child and the scholar alike are arrested by beauty. The guilty conscience pricks both the powerful and the powerless. God's language is democratic. It bypasses privilege and speaks to the common heart. In this way, he ensures that no one is excluded from hearing. Every life, no matter how hidden or ordinary, is filled with these messengers. They are not reserved for the saints, but for all who are willing to see. In this light, life itself becomes a series of invitations. Every laugh, every tear, every breathtaking view, every pang of guilt is an opportunity to respond. They are not interruptions of your life, but the very substance of it, the places where eternity touches time. If you treat them lightly, you risk walking past the very moments that were designed to awaken you. If you attend to them, you discover that God has been speaking all along, not from a distance, but in the very texture of your days. The greatest wonder in all of existence is not that humanity searches for God, but that God stoops down to search for humanity. The infinite, who needs nothing, who is perfect and self-sufficient, bends low to pursue those who are frail, distracted, rebellious, and often indifferent. If he were to remain aloof, no one could accuse him of injustice. If he chose to let the world drift into its own chaos, none could say he was unfair. And yet, he does the unthinkable. He descends, he calls, he seeks, he interrupts, he whispers, he knocks. This is not the story of mankind climbing to the heavens, but of the heavens coming down to mankind. It is the humbling of the Almighty, not because he is weak, but because his love is too fierce to leave us wandering. Consider the disparity. On one side, the creator of galaxies, the one who speaks stars into being, who measures oceans in the palm of his hand, whose power sustains every atom at every moment. On the other side, frail creatures whose lives are a breath, whose strength fades like grass, whose wisdom is limited, and whose hearts are prone to wander. By every natural measure, the distance is infinite, and yet the infinite crosses it willingly. He does not wait for humanity to become worthy, but enters into our unworthiness. He does not demand that we ascend to his majesty, but steps into our weakness. He is the king who removes his crown, the shepherd who leaves the 99 to seek the one that strayed, the father who runs to embrace the wayward child. This stooping is not weakness but strength. It takes no greatness to display majesty from afar. It takes infinite greatness to stoop without losing dignity, to condescend without ceasing to be sovereign. The very humility of God in reaching out to the individual soul is evidence of his supreme power, for he can be so high that no throne can contain him, and yet so near that no heart is beyond his touch. It is a paradox that overwhelms the mind, but awakens the heart. The one who governs the universe also whispers personally to you. The pursuit of God is often misunderstood. Some think of him as distant, waiting coldly for humanity to prove itself worthy. Others imagine him as demanding, offering love only when perfection is achieved. But the reality is far different. His pursuit is relentless and personal. He does not deal with humanity only in masses, but with individuals, each soul known by name, each life of infinite worth. The sunrise that greets you, the conscience that stirs you, the joy that delights you, the sorrow that breaks you. All of these are signs that he has stooped low, tailoring his approach to reach you where you are. He does not shout into the void, but speaks into your particular story, weaving his call through the fabric of your days. Think of how kings and rulers of the world behave. They surround themselves with barriers, with guards, with ceremony. They are unapproachable except to the chosen few. Their authority depends upon distance. But the King of Kings does the opposite. He draws near. He steps into dust and sweat, into laughter and tears, into the daily ordinariness of human life. He seeks not to be hidden behind walls, but to dwell within hearts. While earthly rulers demand service, he serves. While earthly rulers expect to be pursued, he is the one who pursues. This reversal of expectation is not an accident, but the very heart of his character. He stoops because his love will not be satisfied until it finds the lost and restores them. One of the profound consequences of this divine stooping is that no one is too small to matter. The world prizes greatness, wealth, influence, and brilliance. The unnoticed, the poor, the weak are often treated as expendable. But the infinite does not measure by such scales. He pursues the forgotten widow, the overlooked child, the despised outcast, the guilty sinner. He stoops because he values what the world despises, because his vision pierces beyond appearances to the eternal worth of every soul. This pursuit demolishes pride and raises the lowly. It reveals a love so immense that no failure, no weakness, no obscurity can disqualify you from being sought. There is also a hidden cost to this stooping. It exposes the refusal of the human heart. For if God were distant, we could claim ignorance. If he were silent, we could plead uncertainty. But because he stoops, because he comes so near, because he pursues with such clarity, the weight of response falls on us. The excuse of distance is removed. The call is unmistakable. To turn away, then, is not from an abstract idea, but from a God who has bent low, who has reached out, who has given himself. The tragedy of indifference is sharpened by the greatness of the love it rejects. Yet even here, his pursuit does not cease. He is patient, not in weakness but in mercy, extending opportunity after opportunity, longing for the moment the heart softens. His stooping is not a single act but a continual posture. He stoops in creation, filling the world with signs of his presence. He stoops in conscience, pricking the heart with reminders of right and wrong. He stoops in beauty, arresting us with glimpses of his majesty. He stoops in suffering, drawing near when life shatters. He stoops in joy, delighting us with foretastes of eternity. And in all these ways he speaks, not with overwhelming force, but with a gentle insistence that cannot be silenced. What makes this stooping all the more astonishing is that it is undeserved. Humanity does not earn it, cannot demand it, and has no right to expect it. If he were to withdraw, he would still be just. If he were to leave us to ourselves, he would still be righteous. That he chooses instead to pursue is sheer grace. It is the overflowing abundance of his character, the generosity of a love that will not be restrained by our failures. This grace is not abstract, but intensely personal. It means that when you feel unworthy, forgotten, or beyond hope, the truth is the opposite. You are precisely the one he stoops to seek.